Okay. Okay.
What about these two? They don't want them, do they?
I don't think so. It might be blown too much. I don't know. Ask them. Ask them. Yeah.
Change that Fairfield. They'll charge us.
Yes, ma'am.
No, they're not.
You may.
No, as long as you cancel. I'll try. You would, I don't, I'm only down here.
Just put her down a bit or?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
Try that.
Try my best. I'll go upstairs and try. Well, thank you very much.
If that gets too much, I'll take her down.
Blow it out.
Maybe the factors.
Yeah.
They have been quick burn.
So, yeah, they were.
Yeah. We're in an older office building.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming this afternoon. It's 1 o'clock and we'll begin our meeting of the Water Quality Committee. First, before we get started, there are some in the audience that I would certainly like to introduce and welcome them from the Assistant Secretary of Environment, Assistant Secretary Bazemore. I know if she's not here now, she will be shortly. And Bill Lane, Deputy Secretary of Policy and Legal Affairs, General Counsel. Welcome, Bill, this morning. Sharon Martin, Deputy Secretary of Public Affairs. Certainly welcome Sharon this morning. Ellie Young, Mrs. Ellie Young. She's our Assistant Attorney General. It's our first meeting with us, and we're certainly happy to have her today, and I hope she'll be with us for the duration, whatever that is. But welcome you this morning, and I'll certainly be calling on you when I do run into questions, and not if, but when. But thank you again for coming. This meeting will start with some preliminary work matters and some ground rules that I see we've got a full audience. That is good. We appreciate all of you being here. But I must go over this notice. It's a North Carolina General Statute 138A-15. Is that North Carolina does in the General Statute 138A-15 mandates that at the beginning of every meeting of the board, the chair shall remind all members of their duty to avoid conflicts of interest of the board. The chair shall remind all members of their duty to avoid conflicts of interest under this subchapter. The chair also shall require as to whether there is a known conflict of interest with respect of any matters coming before the board today on this agenda. Are there any? Commissioner Ellison.
Out of the nature of my job and the firm I work with, I will abstain from the first action item pertaining to the Division of Mitigation Services.
Thank you. Make note of that. That would be the first item, action item on the agenda. We have the minutes of May 2024. If we can look over those and get a motion when you're ready to approve those minutes.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Twitty.
I'll move that we approve the minutes.
Thank you. Motion is made that we approve these minutes of May 24. Do we have a second?
Second, Bill Yarborough.
Commissioner Yarborough, thank you. Any discussion on these? All in favor, say aye. All those opposed, like sign. Thank you. Motion carries. Getting to our first item today, it's an action item, request approval to proceed to the Environmental Management Commission with a request to send the periodic review of rules report for 15A NCAC subchapter 02R, Division of Mitigation Services, to public notice in accordance with State Law 2013-4-413 HB 74. Ms. Kelly Williams, Division of Mitigation Services. Good to see you this afternoon. Thank you for presenting this to us.
You can arrow down. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kelly Williams with the Division of Mitigation Services. And just get going here. For your consideration today, I have the periodic review and readoption of the rules in 15A NCAC 02R. Let's see. The rules and the report have been provided to all of you. The commission readopted these rules in 2018. Staff is recommending that the 9 rules in the subchapter be given a determination of necessary. Briefly, these 9 rules in subchapter 02R govern the operation of the DMS inlet fee programs, including our basin-wide restoration planning efforts, compensatory mitigation as it relates to that being done in a watershed planning context, and the calculation of the inlet fee rates for stream, wetland, riparian buffer, and nutrient offset credits. This is our anticipated schedule. It has me here now requesting the committee approval to proceed to the EMC at their September meeting to request the commission to approve the determinations and go out for public notice for a 60-day period. Following that, we would request the commission to approve the final determinations at their January meeting and to respond to any comments, provide those responses as well. And I am looking to file the report in March of 2025 to get on the April 2025 Rules Review Commission agenda. This is how you can reach me if you have any questions or you need to verify anything. Or you can ask me a question now.
Any questions for Ken? No questions for this action item? No questions, then what's the pleasure of this committee? Would you please post your recommendation, please?
I don't know how to get to it. Yes, here we go. Is that what you're looking for?
Just looking for your recommendation from your department.
That was it.
That was it, yes.
Just to be clear, the motion or not the motion, but the presentation, their Division of Mitigation Services Rules, 15A NCAC 02R, readopted in 2018. Division of Mitigation Services recommends the 9 rules in the subchapter be given an initial determination of necessary. Is there a motion on the floor we accept this recommendation?
May I ask for clarification? This continues on to the EMC to go to public comment, right? So that needs to be part of the motion.
It does,
Yes.
if that's what the recommendation from the department wants.
Yes, we're requesting approval to proceed to the EMC at their September meeting for their approval of the recommendation of the determination of necessary for the 9 rules and for the approval to go to a 60-day public comment period.
All right, does everyone understand the recommendation from the department. We have a motion on the floor. We accept the recommendation or deny it. Commissioner Twitty.
I'll give it a shot. I will move that the 9 rules that govern DMS, according to the administrative code, be taken to the full EMC in the next meeting for approval to go to public comment. Did I get that right?
All right, motion's been made. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Commissioner Deerhake, second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Thank you. Thank you so much. Good
Thank
presentation.
you.
Second item on the agenda today is to request approval to proceed to the EMC with wastewater flow rate modifications in General Statute 143-215.1 F3 as directed by Session Law 2023-137, Section 18. Nathaniel Thornburg with the Division of Water Resources will make this presentation.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Nathaniel.
Good afternoon, Chairman Keene and members of the committee.
Good afternoon.
My name is Nathaniel Thornburg, and I'm the supervisor of the non-discharge branch in the Division of Water Resources. Today, my action item is to talk to you about the correction of 15A NCAC 02T 0114 wastewater design flow rates. In May, the EMC voted to proceed to public notice and hearing for the proposed amendments to 2T114 and 2T118 pursuant to the 3 session laws listed on the screen. For your recollection, the wastewater design flow rates, the session law established 75 gallons per day per bedroom for wastewater systems serving 2 or more dwelling units. However, in the language that was approved by the EMC back in May, there was the language for single dwelling units was erroneously deleted. In addition, there are no changes in this action item for 2T118, which was approved in May. On your screen, you can see in the boxes in red, what we're proposing to do is to take the language that was erroneously removed in May and move it to paragraph 3 of the new rule. And this language is being modified to state that it's specifically for wastewater systems serving single-family dwelling or single dwelling units. Additional changes that we would like to make to the language that was approved is that further review, we found that the language done by the legislature for paragraphs 1 and paragraph 2 is extremely similar in context. So we wanted to add just some clarifications that paragraph 1 is for an existing permittee, that's highlighted in red. And then paragraph 2 is for applicants and permittees that are wishing to modify their permits. The next change that we're proposing to make to this language is to clarify that for paragraphs 1 and 2, while the limitation from the session law is 75 gallons per day per bedroom, they still have the ability to have a flow reduction below 75 gallons per day, which is why we added the language or proposed the language for unless adjusted pursuant to paragraph F of this rule. The last change that's proposed for 2T114 is in paragraph E. And this is just clarifying that this change from 120 gallons per day to 75 gallons per day is for wastewater systems serving 2 or more dwelling units. So the action that we've brought for you today is to modify the 2T114 action that was approved by the EMC in May. We submitted a regulatory impact analysis and it was approved on June 10th of 2024. So we're requesting that the Water Quality Committee approve to proceed to the EMC to request to proceed to public notice and hearing for the amended rules 214-114 2T114, and then 2T118 pursuant to the listed session laws.
Any questions for Nathaniel? Did have lengthy discussion with the director on this when it did come up, and it's been thoroughly vetted with the department. And I just thank you for having the RIA put together and in good time and on June 10th. Certainly given us a lot of time to study that part. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And so as we move forward then through this action item, now, any questions before we move on? Commissioner Ellison?
No questions. I
I
saw
know
no
you were
questions.
bringing that microphone. Okay, if there are any questions, then I would entertain a motion on their recommendation or their request.
Oh, that's why I was bringing the
Okay.
phone over.
Sorry.
I move that the committee approve this request and move it to the full EMC to proceed to public notice and hearing for the proposed amended rules. Got to read the amendment. Okay.
Yep.
To amend the proposed rules 15A NC AC 02T 0114 and 15A NCAC 02T 0118 pursuant to statute 2023-5.
Everyone understand the motion? We have a second? Commissioner Baumgartner? Second. Motion's been made and seconded. Any questions? Discussion? If none, all in favor, say aye. All those opposed? Thank you so much. I appreciate you working on this. I know the committee does. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Keen.
Next item of business today is our last meeting in May. Time was of essence, and the material being presented on surface water standards covered a much wider scope. As we continue to process information on surface water standards, this item comes to the committee today as information and careful consideration in getting it right. Reflecting on our last meeting, we had lengthy discussions on the meaning and purpose of RIAs, which regulatory impact analysis, and an overview of MPDS wastewater discharge programs, which were then explained by DWR. And they did a great job, by the way. So today's presentation will be somewhat the same with several additions from the department, but more complex than that which we were to review and did not in May. Furthermore, the department recommends herein their approval to proceed to the EMC with proposed amendments and rules associated with the physical regulatory impact analysis for surface water quality standards. For clarity, the RIA regulatory impact analysis and supporting documents had not yet been approved by OSBN when launched on DEQ's website for public notice June 27th and to the committee members. However, the department insisted their recommendations be presented to the committee this afternoon with their assurance OSBM approved RIA and all supporting documents are complete for study and review today. I'd like to ask Director Rogers, Director, has OSBM approved the RIA and supporting documents?
Mr. Chairman, committee members, OSBM has approved the RIA.
When was that approved, Director Rogers?
It was approved today,
What time this morning?
10:56, I'm told.
Okay. Second question and a follow-up with that to the director, did OSBM make any adjustments relating to additions or deletions from the draft that was launched to the public June 27th?
There are some technical amendments and changes that we're more than willing to go over through the presentation with the committee.
Thank you,
Yes, sir.
Director Rogers. We will begin. I understand there are 3 presenters. Chris Cornelaro? I'm sorry, Chris, I get it wrong every
No,
time.
that's
I'm
fine.
sorry. The Southern in me. Julie Gresby? She will be presenting in the middle of this, I think slides 19 through 27. And Stephanie Bolliard, slides 28 through 32. So we'll begin that, and I appreciate your time, and we will break this up into 3 sections. I've talked with the director and found that each presenter has their time with their slides and the presentation. And I would like to also indicate here that I was asked by the director to make room for Assistant Secretary Mazemore after this presentation. And thank you again for coming, and then we'll welcome you to make a few comments after your team finishes with the presentation. Thank you. You can begin.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Chair Keen, and good afternoon, commissioners. Again, my name is Chris Ventolaro. I'm a Water Quality Standards Coordinator with the Division of Water Resources. And as Chair Keen mentioned, Deputy Director Julie Gribb will be doing part of the presentation, and Stephanie Bolliard, who's Assistant Senior Engineer to the Assistant Secretary, will be handling the regulatory impact component. So this rulemaking consists of 2 primary requests. The request number 1 is for the adoption of surface water standards for 8 PFAS compounds in the O2B 0200 rules. This action will serve to protect the most sensitive uses of North Carolina surface waters for PFAS, and primarily the drinking water use, but also the fish consumption use. The second request is for adoption of an implementation plan for these PFAS standards in the O2B 0404 NPDES permitting rules. So DEQ has presented information on this topic pretty consistently over the past year or so. And you can see the dates here where information was provided. And we wanted to provide this slide to provide the links directly to those meeting materials for your reference. Today's presentation is a continuation of this information, as well as a request for the Water Quality Committee to consider, which will be shown towards the end of the presentation.
Excuse me, on that slide,
Yes.
that's incorrect. In May, there was nothing presented to this committee in May. That's why we're having that today.
I think
So-
that I think that was planned, and maybe that was the one that ended up there not being time for, so that should have been indicated on this slide. Yeah, but
Yeah,
Yeah, thanks.
that's an incorrect piece there on that slide because we had no presentation in May and it's not reflected in the minutes. So that probably needs to be taken off.
yeah, we'll get that taken off. Thanks for noticing that. Sorry about that error. Let's see. Okay. So this rulemaking consists of 2 amendments to the O2B rules. One is the adoption of the PFAS water quality standards in the O200 rules. And again, 2 is the adoption of the permitting implementation language in the O2B 0404 rule. This presentation will provide information on the proposed O2B PFAS surface water standards, the NPDES implementation rules, the fiscal analysis, as well as I mentioned, a request for the committee to consider proceeding with rulemaking. I will be covering the proposed O2B PFAS surface water standards portion. And when we talk about water quality standards in North Carolina, we're generally talking about 3 things. Just a little bit of background. I know many of you have heard this through the triennial review presentations, but here a little bit of a refresher. The groundwater standards, drinking water standards, and surface water standards. Each type of standard has their own legal basis, their own protection goal, and their own state programs associated with them. The groundwater standards serve to protect North Carolina's groundwater as a source of drinking water and were required by state regulations. The drinking water standards provide requirements that must be met for treated drinking water and are required by the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. And the surface water standards serve to protect North Carolina's surface waters for various uses, including the consumption of fish tissue, recreation, and the use of surface waters as public water supplies. And it's these surface water standards that we'll be discussing today. And these surface water standards are required by the Federal Clean Water Act, Title 40 of the Code of Federal Regulations, as well as North Carolina's own state regulations and rules. Now, the intent of this rulemaking, again, is primarily to protect the sensitive uses, so drinking water, and really to protect those uses from upstream discharges and other sources of PFAS contaminants into surface water. This slide provides some graphics depicting the exposure of North Carolina citizens to PFAS in drinking water supplied from both public water systems on the left and water supplied by private wells on the right. The graphic also compares their exposure to the recently established EPA PFAS maximum contaminant levels, or MCLs. So as you can see in the pie charts, about 36% of North Carolinians that get their drinking water from public water systems are exposed to PFAS concentrations higher than the MCLs that were recently published by EPA. And that comes out to be about 3.5 million people, or about 1 in 3 people, that are getting their water from these public water systems. In addition, about 25% of North Carolinians that get their drinking water from their private wells are exposed to levels of PFAS higher than the MCLs. And this is estimated to be about 200,000 people, based on data examined by DEQ in groundwater monitoring. This slide shows the same information, but it just condenses both types of information into one pie chart. So DEQ has developed surface water standards for the 8 PFAS compounds shown here in order to protect these sensitive uses, again, drinking water and fish consumption. And the 8 PFAS compounds are the perfluorooctane sulfonic acid, which is known as PFOS, the perfluorooctanoic acid, which is PFOA, the hexafluoropropylene oxide dimer acid, which is HFPODA, otherwise known as GenX, the perfluorobutane sulfonic acid, which is PFBS, perfluorononoic acid, PFNA, if I'm pronouncing that right, and perfluorohexane sulfonic acid, PFHXS, perfluorobutanoic acid, PFBA, and perfluorohexanoic acid, PFHXA. Oops. There we go. Standards were derived from these 8 specific PFAS compounds because health effects for all of these compounds are published in peer-reviewed scientific studies and have been evaluated by federal agencies and other scientific experts. This health effects data supports the development of reference dose and cancer slip factors for these compounds. All of these compounds have been detected in North Carolina's environmental media, so they've been found either in air, water, soil, or accumulated in fish tissue. And all 8 of these compounds can be accurately measured by EPA test method 1633. The surface water standards apply directly in water bodies, and this is otherwise referred to as applying in stream. And these standards are important to consider because the release of these PFAS compounds into surface waters can have a detrimental impact on downstream uses, including drinking water intakes and consumption of fish by people. This graphic illustrates how these upstream discharges can affect the downstream drinking water use, where you see the effluent discharges into the upper portions of this water body, and then lower downstream, you see an intake for a drinking water treatment plant that then has to treat water to meet federal drinking water standards. So DEQ's goal is to provide the Water Quality Committee and the EMC with proposed surface water PFAS standards to protect North Carolina citizens that are based on the best available science. The proposed standards were derived to protect human health, either by using the procedures and calculations described in EPA's methodology for deriving ambient water quality criteria for the protection of human health, in addition to the exposure factor values currently supported by EPA and published in June 2015, or the use of EPA's finalized Safe Drinking Water Act maximum contaminant levels, which were recently published. The EPA 2000 methodology is the same method that EPA follows to develop national recommended water quality criteria as required by Section 304A of the Clean Water Act. The EPA 2015 exposure factors were developed from EPA's most recent evaluation of the Centers for Disease Control National Health Survey data, and the Safe Drinking Water Act MCLs were recently published and underwent extensive review by EPA and external scientific experts, and have also undergone public review and are supported for use as surface water standards, as discussed in EPA's document titled Revisions to the Methodology for Deriving Ambient Water Quality Criteria for the Protection of Human Health. These standards are protective of fish consumption and, again, water supply uses. And we'll show the slide towards the end of my part of the presentation that shows the actual values. The types of toxicological information used to derive the PFAS standards are shown here, and a reference dose, or RFD, is required to derive standards based on a non-carcinogenic health effects. The cancer slope factor, also referred to as a cancer potency factor, is required to calculate standards based on carcinogenic health effects. And the bioaccumulation or bioconcentration factors are required to account for uptake of chemicals in fish tissue, which is then consumed by people. Now, this table shows the toxicity information that was available and that was used to derive the standards for each of the 8 PFAS compounds to protect for the water supply use. The critical health effects associated with the chosen values and the references for those values. The values in bold are what was used to derive the criteria for that individual PFAS compound, and these toxicity values are based on extensive evaluations of the current peer-reviewed scientific information conducted by EPA and the CDC. As an example, for PFOA, an RFD, cancer slope factor, and maximum contaminant level were available. But because since EPA has classified PFOA as a likely human carcinogen in their recent toxicity assessment, the cancer slope factor was deemed the most appropriate toxicity value to use to calculate the standard. Note that the value for GenX here has been updated based on the release of EPA's final drinking water MCLs. In this case, the MCL was more protective of the use than the RFD. And the remaining compounds that have MCLs were not changed due to the MCLs being less protective of the use than the values derived using the EPA 2000 methods. This table shows the same type of toxicity information that was available and that was used to derive the standards for each of the 8 PFAS compounds to protect for the fish tissue consumption use. And not sure if I said it in the last slide, but the values in bold were the values that were actually selected and used to derive the criteria. So I'm not sure if I mentioned that. The main difference between the fish tissue consumption and the water supply consumption is that for GenX, the fish consumption standard was developed using the RFD instead of the MCL because the MCLs are designed specifically for drinking water exposure. And the RFD can be used to calculate a standard specifically for the consumption of fish tissue. This slide shows the calculation used for deriving surface water standards for the protection of fish consumption and drinking water supplies. The calculation is taken from EPA's methodology for deriving ambient water quality criteria for the protection of human health. Again, that 2000 EPA methodology document, and has been simplified to more clearly illustrate how the RFD, cancer potency factor or cancer slope factor, and the BCF or BAF are used in the calculation. The items highlighted in red are the 3 toxicological values mentioned in the previous slide. So the RFD, the CPF in this case, and the BCF. Now, items highlighted in blue are the exposure factors that are currently recommended by EPA for use in deriving fish consumption and water supply standards. The cancer risk level has been set to 1 × 10⁻⁶, as this is the risk level that North Carolina historically used while adopting surface water standards for carcinogens. And it's also the risk level that EPA uses in the development of its national recommended water quality criteria under Section 304A of the Clean Water Act. Now, this presentation just touches very briefly on all of this toxicology information for the developing these standards and kind of in the interest of time. But the detailed description of the toxicological basis for each of these PFAS compounds can be found in this document titled Toxicological Summary Information and Derivation of Surface Water Quality Standards, which is provided as attachment A of the regulatory impact analysis. So that document breaks down each compound, what values were used, why they were selected, et cetera. So it's a good source of information. Now, the proposed PFAS.
Sorry, Chris, I
Yes.
apologize. You just mentioned the RIA.
Yeah, regulatory impact analysis or fiscal note. Sorry about that.
I've got that. Now, back up just 1 minute. I need to understand what you just said. What is in the proposed RIA or the RIA that was approved this morning? I just need that.
It should be in the RIA that was published this morning. It should contain an appendix with supporting information, and this document should be Appendix A.
I know it should be, I guess. It's
I believe
what
it
we've
is.
been reading.
I'll double check with
No,
staff.
that's okay. I don't know. I don't want to get off. I was just asking because the new one this morning is new because there's been additions or deletions, and there's about 5 or 6, 7 pages that are different, and it's not arranged like was launched on June the 27th. So when you're relating to the RIA, then I want the committee members to know that not should have, but it was on that, and it's not part of an adjustment that could have or would have been made between the 27th and this morning. Thank you. That was all, Chris.
And this was in the version that you received late June.
It was what?
It was included in the appendices in the version that you all have reviewed prior to this meeting.
Thank you. Thank you. That's all I asked. Thank you.
Sorry for any confusion about that.
No, you didn't.
The proposed PFAS standards would appear in the rules bolded in red here. The carcinogenic and non-carcinogenic fish consumption standards would appear in the O211 and O220 rules. And the carcinogenic and non-carcinogenic water supply standards would appear in the 5 water supply rules, which are rules O212 through O218, class WS1 through WS5. Now, these rules, including the proposed amendments for the PFAS standards, are also provided as an attachment in that RIA, and those are also in the current version. And the remaining rules in black text will not have any changes associated with PFAS for consideration. And then lastly, this table shows the final proposed standards for the fish tissue consumption use, which would apply in all surface waters, and the water supply protection use, which would apply in all waters, again, classified as water supply, so class WS1 through class WS4. The table also indicates how permit effluent limits will be addressed. This is the last slide for my part of the presentation. I was going to segue next into Deputy Director Julie Gribb to discuss the implementation language associated with these proposed PFAS standards.
Thank you, Chris. Great. Just a breather, just for the committee. Any questions, comments for Chris while he's up there? Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Julie?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Julie Gribb, Deputy Director for the Division of Water Resources. And I'm here to talk about the NPDES implementation rules that we would adopt along with the PFAS standards. They were found in Appendix B with the RRA that was sent to you on page 90. Okay. And specifically what I'm going to be referring to is section .0404 of the 2B amendments that we have proposed. They were not affected by any changes, so they remain the same. Why are we adopting? It's not common that we always adopt rules of this nature with standards. However, given the prevalence and the amount of permittees and citizens affected by these regulations, we felt it necessary to explain how we would implement it to provide clarity to the regulated community and to the citizens of North Carolina. So I'll start with a few basics. What is surface water? Surface water is considered any body of water above ground, including streams, rivers, and lakes. It is a key component of our hydrogeologic cycle and provides various societal and ecosystem services, including drinking water, agriculture, irrigation, and habitat for aquatic plants and wildlife. To understand or have an idea of what the magnitude of wastewater that is discharged into our surface waters that can indeed impact downstream users, specifically our drinking water supplies, and just supplied a little information for you all here. The publicly owned treatment works with pretreatment programs, so POTWs with pretreatment programs, meaning they have significant industrial users that discharge to them. We have in MPDS permits, there's allocated over 1,188 million gallons per day going to our surface water. For industrial direct dischargers, the majors, there's over 305 million gallons a day allocated to those dischargers that are going into our surface waters. So they do affect our streams and what we're using for drinking water. So I'll explain 22% of the community drinking water systems use surface water as source water. 41% of the large public water supply systems serving more than 10,000 people exceed EPA PFAS maximum contaminant levels, the recently proposed MCLs by EPA. Approximately 3.6 million residents are impacted by drinking water quality that exceeds EPA's PFAS MCLs. So to guide us in coming up with the rules on how we would implement it, we wanted to first protect drinking water sources from upstream dischargers and other sources of contaminants that are going into the surface water. Wanted to reduce drinking water treatment cost burden to the North Carolinians by addressing upstream dischargers, and reduce wastewater treatment cost burden to North Carolinians by addressing discharges with background sources or our passive receivers after upstream reductions have occurred. And to provide clarity, as I said, to regulated sources and reasonable time for monitoring and taking actions to meet effluent limits. So, as Chris showed, surface water dischargers impact downstream users and their costs. Not shown on this slide, they also impact groundwater uses. I'd like you to note, though, standards proposed here are for in-stream values, okay? But when developing effluent limits for MPDS permits, dischargers are given credit for dilution using approved EPA permitting procedures. In other words, rarely do standards equal an effluent limit. On this slide, it's a table that shows some numbers of permits or facilities that we have and that are anticipated impacts, how many of those will be, or do we anticipate will be impacted by these regulations. Please note, significant industrial users discharge to POTWs with pretreatment programs, and it is those municipalities that oversee those 606 permits. They are the authority and they write the permits, and it's based on the effluent limits in their permit. So this will be a step process. Right now, so you know, we've already implemented and working on assessment monitoring. Assessment monitoring means that we're getting everybody to start and see what they have. We're putting PFAS monitoring and NPDS permits for POTWs with pretreatment programs. And EPA targeted certain significant industrial users and direct dischargers that are known or likely to have PFAS, and we're asking them to sample for PFAS. And the POTWs are also doing it themselves or asking their SIUs to sample for PFAS and understand what they have and what their sources are. When the method 1633 is promulgated and adopted into 40 CFR 136, these same facilities or MPDS permittees will start using a certified lab for that method. With that certified data, the MPDS can then start to write effluent limits for the appropriate permittees that show reasonable potential or have large quantities of PFOA and PFOS. and we will start to work on that. That will be a two-tiered system, okay? And the first tier being what we want to focus on are those that are significant dischargers of PFOA, PFOX, and Gen X. That is when you look at all the data, that's the main pollutants where we're seeing large exceedances. Why would we do that? Because we want to eliminate the ones that are actually creating PFAS and PFOA. We don't want to punish people who are not really creating it, but it's in the water they intake and then they discharge it. Okay. So we want to reduce the PFAS that's in the surface water. Okay. And then tier 2 will be, after that is implemented, then we'll really see what the true effects are out there and who else needs to go ahead and meet the water quality, the PFAS water quality standards.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to get you off track here.
Okay.
I'm not going to spend time on this. Wasn't there originally 5 tiers?
There was, but as I'll explain later, we
Yeah,
met
yeah.
with stakeholders. So,
Yeah, fine. I
so
thought
we
there were.
merged, we essentially merged everything into tier 1 for the first 4 tiers.
Gotcha. And all the stakeholders were a part of this tier 5 to tier 2.
They heard the 5-tier system, some stakeholders, but then we merged them, given comments that we received from all the stakeholders.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Sorry.
So why assessment monitoring and tiers? Well, as I said, to allow time for large municipalities with many industrial users to initiate industrial and effluent monitoring that enables them to identify sources and implement measures that will reduce PFAS loadings. So right now, people, they're starting to, our POTWs, our industry, they can see if they have it. They can start to take action. They can look for product substitution. They can change the campaigns that they run. So they can start now. They can then see whether it impacts them, and there's time for them to start doing that. To address facilities that are discharging significant amounts of PFAS in their wastewaters, and that's tier 1. And to allow time for downstream facilities to see improvements in the level of PFAS in source waters, which would reduce their treatment costs. Okay? And to allow time for background levels, often what's referred to as uncontrollable or residential sources, to be assessed. And that's very important because we really need to see what is background, and they can get, a POTW, for instance, can get the industry to make reductions. That will only go so far. Then they need to know what they might have to treat at the POTW, or they may not, but that's what they have to figure out. Okay. You can imagine that compliance schedules will be written for all these facilities that give phased limits to work their way towards achieving the final limit. Some other basic things after talking to stakeholders too, we wanted to clarify in these rules for PFOA and PFOS, the limit of quantification in the EPA test method 1633 is 4 nanograms per liter, which means effluent limits for PFOA and PFOS that are calculated to be less than the limit of quantification shall be given a permitted effluent limit of the limit of quantification, which is 4. Programs which are really not part of this implementation schedule are minor POTWs without pretreatment programs, 100% domestic non-municipal wastewater treatment plants, and NPDES facilities with general permits. Simply, they are not sampling for PFAS, and we don't have any intention of asking them to. However, should it be pointed out that they are impacting a downstream water use designation because they have PFAS, then we will have to look at it. NPDES permits for new sources or new dischargers for industrial direct dischargers, major POTWs, or major or minor POTWs with pretreatment programs shall include PFAS effluent limits. In other words, we don't want to add to our current loading with new dischargers. So as I said, we had many stakeholders meetings with the regulated community and with the environmental organizations. Okay. And that is usually work that sometimes you do during the public comment period, but we really wanted to hear from them. We wanted to have them help us make these implementation rules. And so we made some adjustments to our rules based on their comments. We realized that when it goes to public comment, there'll be more comments and we will have to make further adjustments. But we tried to get a little bit ahead of the game and get their input up front. So some changes we made, we wanted to acknowledge that they would have to report all PFAS analyzed in EPA test method 1633. That with we changed it from 5, the limited implementation to 2 tiers to identify and prioritize all dischargers that are contributing PFAS in tier 1. This reduces the cost of compliance for dischargers in tier 2. And this approach reduces costs for downstream drinking water systems. Tier 1 facilities can request to move to Tier 2 if the PFAS in their effluent discharge is not greater than 10% of the PFAS in their source surface water intake. And I'll add what's not said here, or mass equivalent. And that was asked specifically by the water treatment plants. Okay. For PFOA and PFOS, values reported less than the limit of quantification, the facility shall report to the division the actual numerical lab measurement for all samples. And that's very common. That's what we do for total residual chlorine. We do it for other parameters. And that's all I have today before Stephanie comes up.
Yeah. Breather? Thank you. That's a good presentation. Any questions? All right, move forward to the next part. Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Hey, Stephanie.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Stephanie Boyard. As Chris mentioned earlier, I am the Senior Engineer Duty Assistant Secretary. I was responsible for leading the fiscal analysis, and I'll give you a brief overview of that information. So typically, the next step, as you saw, we now need to evaluate our proposed rules and how they would affect various entities across North Carolina. Under our cost estimation, we considered the following entities that could be impacted and to what extent they could be impacted, which is the private sector, local state government, and local governmental entities and state government. Embedded in these costs are monitoring per our rules, treatment, and operation and maintenance if a facility were to get an effluent limit. One thing I do want to stress is that this aspect of the fiscal note and other aspects of the fiscal note, we did not work alone internally with DEQ. We hired 2 nationally recognized consulting firms to help us develop our cost models. They also helped vet our various scientific and engineering principles that are made up to come to our various conclusions. That cost estimation, you'll notice, is over 36 years. I do want to note that that does take into account the tiered implementation approach that allows all facilities that are projected to receive an effluent limit to get their limit, go through their compliance schedule, implement that treatment, pay that off over a typical 20-year payback period, and start operation and maintenance. On the benefits side, we looked at what are the anticipated benefits of implementing and adopting our proposed rules. Those benefits included both quantitative, ones that we're able to monetize, and qualitative that, based on the available information right now, we might not be able to do that today, but they have been valid benefits that have been discussed extensively in the scientific literature. The quantitative side, we looked at human health, preservation of property value, just some examples. We also looked at public water supply and private well treatment cost savings. And then on the qualitative side, we discussed health benefits that we're not able to quantify in our benefits analysis, co-pollutant removal from the treatment technologies that can be utilized to remove PFAS, as well as shifting from a ratepayer impact to a polluter pays principle. So the regulatory impact analysis, I know EMC got a really great overview last meeting by OSBM. The fiscal note that we've provided includes both the fiscal and regulatory impact analysis that is developed per our general statutes. It includes the rationale and reasoning behind the rule amendment, the fiscal analysis approach, a cost benefit summary, and then the rule alternatives. That's going to be specifically required if you have a rule that triggers a significant impact to the various entities. The main supporting information that was included in the initial fiscal analysis that you received, in addition to the one that was certified today and posted by OSBM, there were 3 main attachments. The first being that toxicological summary that Chris had mentioned. That was the basis for the derivation of the surface water quality criteria. Appendix B is the red line proposed rule amendments. And then Appendix C is the technical memorandum on how we developed costs that was developed by our consultants and then leveraged in our fiscal analysis. So this is our summary of our impact of the proposed rules over our 36-year evaluation period. I want to note the monitoring and treatment costs to the private and public entities are projected to be about $11.2 billion over that 36-year period. Keeping in mind that includes capital expenditures and operation and maintenance during that time, in addition to monitoring. Looking at the monetized benefits, the total benefits are projected to be approximately $11.7 billion over that same period of time. Those monetized benefits in the value you see here is human health benefits, savings to downstream drinking water utilities, private well avoided treatment, state and federal wastewater infrastructure funding that is available through DEQ's Division of Water Infrastructure, and preservation of property value. The benefits that we did not monetize in this fiscal note includes additional extensive avoided health impacts, such as additional cancers that cannot be monetized, cardiovascular endocrine effects that will improve quality of life, reproductive, developmental, and neonatal effects that can be avoided for healthier children, removal of co-pollutants, and shifting from the treatment burden from ratepayers to polluter pays. I do want to note that the natural and environmental resource preservation benefits are not included at this time, but can be significant positive benefits to the adoption of this rule. So the main key takeaways for our fiscal analysis. It is recognized the impact to the regulated industries. So the direct dischargers, industrial, and POTWs are significant due to the widespread contamination of PFAS across North Carolina. The monetized benefits to the state as a whole and over the 10 million residents do outweigh the costs through improvements in short and long-term health, quality of life, preservation of property value, and other societal and economic factors. The non-monetized benefits provide additional value to the state's residents, economy, and the environment. We do want to note that lack of action is projected to place an extensive financial burden on North Carolinians that exceeds the total cost and benefits of the proposed rule. And we do ask that EMC and the public equally weigh both the costs and benefits to address PFAS pollution. And that is the end until we have Julie come up. Any questions?
Questions?
Good. Sorry, if you don't mind getting caught up in this table. I do want to note, as Commissioner Keene, you had mentioned that there was an update to the certified and approved version of the fiscal note that was uploaded this morning. What you received on June 26th or 27th that was uploaded to this website was what we sent to OSBM for approval. Part of that review process is the department responding to any questions, comments, clarifications, and any recommendations that OSBM deems necessary for them to approve and certify what we have provided. I want to note that OSBM did come back with comments and feedback that did warrant changes to the fiscal note. The main technical change that was recommended is that the monetized benefits that you see on the screen, specifically for the infrastructure funding, they had no objection to the quantification and how we projected out those numbers. None of the feedback that we got had anything to do with the validity of the numbers and the approach and the scientific rigor and all of that. What they did deem is that they felt like that line item was not best representative of a benefit, but as a cost offset. What they recommended us to do is move that line item into monitoring and treatment costs as a reduction in the total cost to those affected entities. So that section you'll see now in the certified posted fiscal note will be cost and cost offsets to affected entities. You will notice on the monetized benefits, you will no longer see the Division of Water Infrastructure. What's important to note is that with that reduction for costs, you're looking at about $9.5 billion, taking out that $1.7 billion in infrastructure funding, and the monetized benefits drop down to 9.96. What's important to take away is our overarching message and conclusions of the fiscal note you saw in June are still the same. We're just looking at a recommendation that is pretty common from OSBM during the review process where they could request further updates and changes.
I thank you for that explanation, and you did a good job at that. You did a good job at your presentation. But respectfully, the RIA is this committee, it's the EMC's. It's not the department's. It's ours. And there is a 48 period before I think you can even post it to the department's website. And in saying that, I have not seen this change, and no one up here in this horseshoe has seen that change. And as far as I know, as chair or vice chair or other members, I've not seen any discussion or any stakeholder involvement in that change. Though it may be minor, it's certainly not minor with the committee because we've taken the fiscal note or the RIA very seriously on the 27th of June. That was sent out through the department, knowing it was in draft. And any change, we certainly would want to know, certainly before this morning. But, and again, that was just a comment that I wanted to make, but thank you for explaining that, okay? And I understand now that the Assistant Secretary would like to take the podium and have something to say.
We do have a few more slides that we were going to have Julie Gribbs finish up, and then we'll have Shipma come up.
Okay, I just
There.
wanted to give you an opportunity to,
Thank you.
okay.
We just have the last slide. It's pretty straightforward. You mentioned that it was going to be our request anyway, Chair King. So very much we are seeking for the Water Quality Committee to approve and these proposed standards and rules and RIA to proceed to the EMC with the request for public notice and hearings for the proposed rule amendments for surface water quality standard rules as listed there, and the permitting rule 0.0404 and the associated fiscal and regulatory impact analysis. Okay.
Thank you.
I also would like to say that we, our team that has worked very hard on all of this, stands ready to answer any of your questions, additional meetings, times, whatever you need, we'd like to make available to you.
Thank you. Assistant Secretary Mazemore would like to take the podium. She has to speak today.
Thank you, Chair Keen, and members of the commission. Thank you for this opportunity to speak a few statements. I wanted to step back on this topic and this subject that is so important to everyone in North Carolina, to this body. We all are taking this very seriously. PFAS is a topic that we as a department has prioritized for over 2 years. It has been part of our action strategy. And we live and breathe this every day. We understand the extent of PFAS contamination in our state. And so what you see is a personal commitment, but also a professional commitment from every one of us to convey to this body that ultimately has the authority on these rules. And I wanted to just step back and give 3 points to consider. Number one is whether or not the public, you all, we accept the science behind the health impacts of PFAS pollution, particularly these 8 compounds. We're not saying thousands of PFAS out there, but these 8 specific chemicals for which multiple federal agencies, credible academia, scientists, and experts around the country and the world have put together their consensus documentations and peer-reviewed reports. If PFAS is accepted as those that are causing human health effects that are detrimental to our quality of life and our well-being? That's the first question. We did not receive any questions or concerns in the November meeting that we presented the science behind this and today. And it's an important question, is do we accept the health impacts of these 8 PFAS? The second question is, are we exposed to it? What is the presence of these 8 PFAS in our waters, in the water that we drink, in the water we rely on? And we've shown in the many presentations, data, monitoring information, not only from us, but also third party, the permittees, that shows the presence of these PFAS at different levels. So when you combine both of those, then the third question is, what does North Carolina believe that they want to do to protect our public? And the rulemaking process is one of those processes. And we have articulated here the best way to acknowledge the cost and the impact to the regulated community. Because in the absence of that, the ratepayers, the everyday North Carolinian, is going to have to pay for that to clean up that drinking water. They may have to pay for that through their health outcomes over a lifetime. And so when you look at the compilation of those benefits and those occurrences, then we're asking an equitable analysis of looking at the benefits of this pollution. And we're ready to help and provide any answers, questions, but really it is our, again, the best foot forward. I did want to remind that Commissioner Keene, that you had asked us to not forward the draft RIA to OSBM until the chairs of the committee had access to it. So we did not formally submit the RIA to OSBM until it was provided to the committee. And that has given us less than 2 weeks to address the committee's comments. I'm sorry, to address the OSBM's comments. But as you look at it and review the changes that are made, Stephanie provided an overview of the main technical comment. We're ready to provide clarifications to this committee. And I'm happy to answer any questions with the rest of our team. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to open it up for questions. That was something that they wanted questions from, so we'll open it up to committee members for questions at this time on that presentation. More specifically, the RIA, keep on saying the IRA, the regulatory impact analysis. Any questions from committee members? Commissioner Baumgartner.
So I'd just like to start out a little bit by challenging Assistant Secretary Macemore. There was a lot of questions at the November meeting. And we're at July with what we received as an RIA, draft RIA 2 weeks ago for this committee. We could have been working as a committee on the RIA with the department for 6 months and having those discussions. But I've spent a lot of time going through this RIA. I challenged the department last meeting to say, when you receive a permit, you don't get presentations on a permit. You don't have a permittee come to you and say, well, this is what I want to do, and then you issue a permit. They provide a permit application package, and then that's reviewed by the department to initial and to review, comment, and then provide permit if it's necessary. I think we should take the same approach with the IRA and reviewing these documents for us right now. We finally have gotten a draft IRA this time. We have had the opportunity to review it. And Mr. Chairman, I think we need to go through those and provide those comments to the department on that draft IRA now. But I challenge the fact that, or the assertion, there hasn't been any questions, or that, you know, the committee hasn't moved forward on anything. We haven't been provided documentation to review. We've just had a lot of presentations and we've talked about it. It's what the department has chosen to do for the last 6 months.
Commissioner Baumgartner, I certainly would encourage other committee members to move in that direction, to ask questions about the regulatory impact analysis as presented to us in June 27th and launched to the public at that time on their website. Any questions from the Commissioner Ellison?
I would first ask you to please send us the comments that you got from OSBM. That might be helpful for further evaluations. One thing from Julie, are the EPA MCLs, you mentioned proposed MCLs. Are they proposed or are they effective for drinking water?
They're finalized now.
They're final. Okay, that's what I thought, but.
Yeah, I'm
okay.
sorry.
That's fine, that's fine. Boy, well, I got a lot of questions. The executive summary on page 8 says the purpose of an RIA is to improve rule design. So can you tell me, other than the comments that you just got recently, how did your RIA process, specifically developing the RIA, how did it improve the design of your proposed rule?
I would say one of the main areas that when we first started this, discussing what affected entities could be and modeling and projecting out when effluent limits could be assigned and by these various permittees, that brought to light the need to look at implementation. And I would say that's one of the first areas where I do feel like improved rule design is, like Julie Gribbs mentioned, typically you don't see that aspect of the rulemaking process to have implementation guidelines. And I'll hand it over to Julie to discuss that.
The RRA is very helpful because when you're looking at all the impacted discharges, you start to see numbers, you start to see how many, you start to see the staff you need, you start to see how you might implement it. So we went back and forth talking to each other as she was working on that and as I was working on the implementation. So it was very helpful in establishing certainly the implementation rules on how we would go about it.
So you didn't have the proposed numeric criteria and for that section of proposed rules and do the RIA, and you were working the RIA and the proposed rules iteratively and together? Is that?
The implementation part.
Okay, okay.
I would say, if I could add, another aspect that is really important to note, especially as Julie mentioned, 464 SIUs go to POTWs. I think one of the important scenarios that we looked at is where does that PFAS treatment occur, whether it's upstream at the SIU or the POTW. So part of our analysis, and it was included in the uncertainties and limitations section, is projecting what the cost could be to a POTW if they were to elect to treat the full PFAS loading that is coming to their facilities from those significant industrial users versus what would happen if they eliminated their industrial sources and left with background, as Julie Cribbs highlighted, is what you would consider residential. And so we also wanted, in a lot of our stakeholder meetings, we communicated that point of the cost effectiveness of that and what the increased treatment cost burden could be that POTW, depending on how they handle their permittees through their control authority.
So of the SIUs, do any of them make critical medical devices where PFAS are like the only way to make that medical device properly functional?
I do not remember specifically. We do cover the main sector categories in the Appendix D of our fiscal analysis. But one thing important to note is our rules are not prohibiting the use of PFAS by any of these manufacturing. So in the event, if you have a medical facility that is using PFAS to make something that is very critical, we recognize that. We're not telling them to stop. What we're telling them to do is they need to control their PFAS emissions. And if they're not a direct discharger, then they should work with their POTW as to how they would best handle that PFAS loading from that facility.
But you pass that on to the POTW to pass it on to the SIU rather than for the state rule for which that industry, that device or whatever may be extremely critical for the citizens of North Carolina, you're just kind of passing the buck off to the POTW, right? You don't have any exception or some way where the citizens can continue getting that critical device of whatever it is without potentially shutting them down or putting a regulatory burden on them. Is that what you're telling me?
Well, one, it's going to be a business decision. I think any business entity has the cost of operations and has, cost to consider. We can't project at what point a facility would, as you said, could potentially shut down. What we're telling through this process is that we do need to control these emissions. We do not know how the POTW is going to use their control authority, and I can shift over to Julie to speak to your state's role and the rules on that passing that burden off.
So there's many things that go into this process. If someone had such a facility and they had, 56 million gallons a day discharge, and such a process created 1,000 gallons of wastewater, it may have little effect on the overall system. They may not need to be regulated, right? Or it could be that it is significant, and the POTW, being the overseeing authority, could say, we're going to give all our allocation or 80% of our allocation to this facility, and we'll still meet our permit limit. And the other industry are going to have to install treatment, or at least the treatment necessary at this facility may be not cost prohibitive, have them install a certain amount of treatment that is feasible for them to do. So there's other things. Now, if it comes down to it that it's so significant, okay, that it causes severe violations or causes violations of their effluent limits, the POTW has a right to argue that this is cost prohibitive right now. Maybe someday it won't be, but it's cost prohibitive at this point to get to the limit because of this facility. And we want a variance. Okay, we would like a variance. So this is something that just plays out over time. We don't know all the uses out there right now. We don't know all the sources. And this will play out over time. This is why we have compliance schedules. This is why we are, really what I like about it now, we have this assessment monitoring going on. This is a great time to figure out who they are, what can be done. Okay, and so when we work with a compliance schedule with the POTW, they tell us their problems, and we work on that, and we try and give them time to reach and get to those numbers.
Okay, and that's all very valuable. I think because one of the things that's been mentioned multiple times is the concept of regulatory certainty for the public. And I think it would be very helpful if you would add some narrative that explains how the department would work with the POTW that oversees the industrial user. And perhaps the department could identify some critical industries that provide relatively unique and very important tools or compounds or whatever that may need PFAS right now. I think you can help in the compliance if you lay that out for folks, because if you don't lay it out more specifically, then the only regulatory certainty that a business may have is that the POTW can put more burden on them than they may be ready for. Does that make sense?
It does, and maybe we can explain it a little better in our reports. Please know all these rules, compliance schedules, all that are written into rule. So they're out there. People are aware of them, maybe not, as every citizen certainly can't understand them. And also know it's going to be hard for us to address every situation. We just can't possibly think of everything that's going to happen out there.
Understood. How long have PFAS generally been in use?
You haven't.
I think about 1938 is when they first were discovered and started to be utilized in things like Scotchgard, coatings. I think FDA a few, maybe 10, 20 years later, approved the use of that. And it's just been ramped up and used very broadly. across not only manufacturing and industrial process, but used in everyday products.
And then when did Chemours, or I guess initially DuPont, start manufacturing PFAS? So 1958 or something like that?
You know, when they started in this country, I don't know. And in here, I don't think they got a permit until the 80s or so. So that might be some time frame as to when they started in North Carolina. But I don't know in the country when they started.
Assistant Secretary Maysmore does agree with kind of your estimate about 1958, 1960 use.
Okay, so pre-Clean Water Act.
Exactly, yes.
Pre-Clean Air Act.
Yep.
Okay, so for decades, we've been using this stuff and making this stuff before we had our current environmental controls. So it's reasonable to assume then that the contamination of air and ground and surface water and soil and that this has been going on since sometime between 1940 and the late 50s. So we've got decades and decades of this pollution. Is that reasonable? Okay. How many people have died in North Carolina from PFAS poisoning?
I don't think that's something that has been documented.
Has anyone ever died of an illness that was directly attributable to PFAS as confirmed by post-mortem examinations?
I think this is getting outside of our expertise and the purpose of discussing the fiscal note in terms of the validity of the health benefits.
Well, but it's not just a fiscal note, okay? It's a regulatory impact analysis that to a large extent is predicated on projections of health effects that are statistically derived. And so I'm just asking if the statistical machinations used to arrive at some of these numbers, if we have any physical data or medical data for some, like we have fish tissue consumption data, right? You guys have sampled fish, is that correct? Okay. Well, since we're on that one, did you use the real fish tissue concentrations from your fish monitoring in developing the fish tissue consumption part of your limits, or did you use the RFD?
Good afternoon. My name is Brandy Nelson. I'm the environmental toxicologist at DEQ. The fish tissue project we did 2 summers ago entailed sampling a wide variety of species, and the concentrations we found in their tissues were paired with the water concentrations to calculate a bioaccumulation factor. That is one of the toxicological values that is required to calculate a standard. So it's not the direct concentration of the fish tissue, it's a factor between the water and the fish that is related to bioaccumulation of those compounds up the food chain. And so we did that with all of the species we had data available for, and then the EPA has put out a publication reviewing all of the available bioaccumulation and bioconcentration factor data and summarizing that, and we used that to be consistent across all of the compounds we're proposing rules for. Does that answer your question?
Well, but it sounds like no, you didn't use North Carolina fish tissue. So you used a combination of North Carolina fish tissue data plus water concentration plus EPA data. That's how you came up with your fish numbers, fish consumption numbers?
Not entirely. So the bioaccumulation factors that are required for the surface water standards, the factor is derived from a fish tissue concentration and a water concentration divided by each other. And that's related to bioaccumulation. So the BAF that's needed to calculate the standard number comes from fish and water together as a factor. We used the North Carolina values were presented to the State Science Advisory Board and compared to the EPA's comprehensive publication that they presented a wide variety of species and a longer swath of PFAS bioaccumulation factors for. The numbers were very minutely different. Bioaccumulation factors are really measured in order of magnitude. And so the order of magnitude, even the numbers themselves, were very similar between the Cape Fear River and the rest of the United States, which matches all of the data we had. The Cape Fear River is very average compared to the rest of the country.
So why would you use, and this is just probably just my ignorance, but if I'm worried about ingesting PFAS from fish consumption, I don't care about the water concentration. I care about what's in the tissue that I'm eating. So can you explain why you would combine those?
Sure. So when the Department of Health and Human Services calculates a fish consumption advisory for human consumption of fish tissue, they use the concentrations from the fish tissue. So what you're directly eating, those advisories are related specifically to the concentrations in the tissue. The bioaccumulation factor that we need, it's not just what's in the fish tissue, because we need to assume accumulation is happening. And so when you take the fish tissue concentrations and the water concentrations together, it denotes accumulation in the environment. Does that make
Okay, I
sense?
understand that part. So why do you automatically assume bioaccumulation is occurring?
You don't. And so that's what the bioaccumulation equation tells you. If it's a number greater than 1, it's accumulation. And so for some compounds, it's actually less than 1.
If when you revise the draft RIA, if you could provide a more thorough explanation of that, I think that would be very helpful.
Oh, I would love to.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Chairman,
Wait a second, we've just got some follow-up questions.
one of the
Commissioner,
other members might have an opportunity to ask questions too.
Commissioner Deerhake, respectfully, he's speaking. We'll give him time to follow up his questions. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, you use the EPA's 2000 water quality methodology, and that's standard. We understand that. But you mentioned there are a couple of places in the document where it states that other methods may be used. So what other methodologies besides the 2000 water quality? I understand that's the standard, but what other methods would comply with EPA requirements?
So, well, good afternoon again, Chris Ventolaro. Basically, the EPA method was focused on because that's the established method that EPA uses and encourages states to use in the developing of human health criteria. The requirements from the Clean Water Act, 40 CFR, Code of Federal Regulations are that water quality standards are based on sound scientific information and are scientifically defensible. So a demonstration of any scientifically valid data and being able to show how that data supports the calculation of the water quality numeric value would be appropriate. But in general, the 2000 document provides this nice kind of package methodology that was used. And I'm not familiar exactly with the reference in the RIA that you're speaking of, so there may be some context.
There were a couple of places where it mentions other methods can be used, and I didn't know if because in the statement about using the 2000 methodology, it just said we used this and it complies with EPA requirements.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are other places where it says the department or the EMC may use different methods or numbers or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering if there were alternatives to the 2000 method. And I understand that it's defensible and it's the standard and all that. I just wondered if there were any other methods available.
Well, again, not having the context of the document to kind of read through, I would just say that in general, a scientifically defensive methodology being used. So for example, you could alter the 2000 methodology to look specifically at site-specific conditions. And so there's variations to that methodology that can be used, but specifically like referring specifically to like a specific thing. Yeah, I'm not sure without looking at the document and seeing more of the context of that. I can't really say exactly what was intended there. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any existing or anticipated legal challenges to EPA's MCLs?
I'm not aware of any. I
Okay.
just wouldn't be privy to that information at this time.
Okay. On page 14, it says considering FAND, F-A-N-D, other technical feasibility, at least on my copy. Something missing there, or is it my printer?
What is the section number?
Page 14 in the, I believe that's executive summary. 2A, background PFAS and drinking water. Third sentence, third sentence. If you could just clarify that, take a look at that missing sentence. I'm trying to move a little quicker. Okay, the MCLs for drinking water, do they compel this prompt response with surface water standards? Is there something in there? And I understand you're trying to do your job and execute your mission of protecting public health and the environment. I get that. But is there a driver, a scheduling driver between the EPA's MCLs and this push on the PFAS?
So maybe the first question, are you saying did EPA formally make a note of a need for surface water standards at the state level in their presentation of the MCLs?
Well, they promulgated MCLs, but they have not issued surface water numeric criteria for surface water.
That's done at the state level. That is not done at the federal level.
Bill, if I could, so, as you know, the Safe Drinking Water Act is its own standalone act. But so with regard to surface water standards, EPA has been developing national recommended criteria for protection of fish consumption and protection of water consumption. And they also have draft aquatic life criteria that have been out for public notice. But those are still in the development stage. So they don't specifically right now have national recommended criteria for surface waters, but they are working on those.
Okay.
Use all the signs.
Yeah.
Okay, just let me get through one more section of these and then I'll let others speak. There's a lot of emphasis in here on ground and surface water and the surface water standard protecting domestic wells and protecting groundwater. And I'm wondering, has there been a mass balance established for ground surface water interactions and PFAS contamination coming from, say, floodwaters and getting into wells? Because that's one of the things mentioned in the document.
I would say beyond the principal engineering principles around surface and groundwater interaction and recognizing that those are not going to be, in their own silos, not impacting each other. We understand kind of those fundamental fate and transport and movement of fluids. In addition to that, one of the founding reasons why we have mentioned that is due to our history and observations of industrial manufacturing impacts across 8 counties across North Carolina, and looking at industrial signatures versus other signatures that could point to why PFAS may or may not be detected in a well. There have been also other studies done by USGS and other scientists that have looked at industrial impacts as to impacts to private wells, also due to surface water and groundwater interactions. I do want to note that looking at the fundamental science on those interactions, when we're looking at shallow wells, those interactions are on orders of days. So in terms of surface water containing pollutants, they can impact shallow wells fairly quickly.
So what are the primary aquifers that are contaminated?
That is not something that I have information on, but we would be glad to provide that, or if you have any.
We have a whole presentation on that I could do at a separate time if you'd like. But it's, I don't know that it's specifically relevant to the proposed surface water rules.
Well, but there's a lot of narrative in the RIA about protecting groundwater and domestic wells and public water supply wells from surface water. And so I'm just wondering, what are the characteristics of those aquifers? Are these domestic wells primarily tapping the superficial aquifer, which would easily be contaminated by surface water, or more easily than an aquifer, a confined aquifer at 400 feet?
What we've done in the studies that we see superficial wells are impacted by PFAS discharges, and we see it clearly down at Comores. Okay. And even just from the water distribution systems, from that took and used the surface water below Comores for the Cape Fear, they take it into their system. The actual piping of the distribution system has actually, because they all leak, that's actually impacted wells, private wells in those areas. So we see all sorts of ways that it impacts the groundwater, but mainly the superficial wells are we see most, but we certainly see PFAS and other levels of different aquifers.
And since Comores has been spewing PFAS for 70 years or whatever, that wouldn't necessarily be coming from surface water, would it? It could be in the groundwater?
Well, it came from the surface water to the groundwater in some cases, that we do know.
And that's been established how?
With our groundwater testing, and that the only source were surface waters.
I'm sorry, the daily source?
The source was the surface water.
Okay. Well, that would be interesting information. You've got another presentation. I don't guess I haven't seen it, but that would be, if there's a report.
We have huge documents that Comores had to produce.
Okay, well, that concise summary of, if it's a huge document, to establish that would be helpful, because we don't have a lot of losing streams in North Carolina, particularly in the lower Cape Fear. So how that interaction has been demonstrated, understanding that would be helpful. I'll just leave it at that for
Okay. So any questions, other questions from committee members? Commissioner Drake.
If anyone else has something more pressing, I'll wait, but.
Go ahead, please. You recognize.
Go ahead.
Yes, okay.
Oh, these are just questions.
Yeah, my question is for our department counsel and perhaps Assistant Secretary Mason-Moore. I would like for us to be reminded about what our obligation is under the Clean Water Act, and in particular for this compound and this program to protect what we understand are more than a third of the state's population being exposed to unsafe levels of PFAS.
Afternoon, Sushma Mason-Moore, and Bill may follow me. As Julie mentioned, the Clean Water Act implementation is under the state's authority, delegated authority under the Clean Water Act. And so through the EMC, of course. So when, as the beginning of the RIA explains, and some of the rationale as to why we're bringing this in front of you, we have our 0200 rules basically says that under the Clean Water Act, we shall not allow toxic pollutants in toxic amounts. It is spelled out in our statute in the Clean Water Act. The question is, again, I'm going to go back to my number one question, which is, how did we define toxic pollutants? Are there toxic pollutants that are of concern? And second, are they in toxic amounts where they are found in our waters? When those two questions are answered, then we are obligated under the delegated authority to take action under the Clean Water Act to propose methods for reducing the discharge of those pollutants. And that, I hope, answers a question that it is under the purview of the state authority. In the event that state does not do that, we have other states that are looking at PFAS for water discharges. Those states acted before North Carolina proposed and even before MCLs came out. And they're in the process of updating their numbers. So we are in the leading edge. but it is under our obligation to act because of the presence of those toxic pollutants.
Thank you. Any follow-up?
Yes, thank you.
Question?
And if we do not act, we're at risk of losing our delegation under MPDES, is that correct?
I could just back up for 1 second. The Clean Water Act functions between the federal government and the state similar to the way that the Clean Air Act functions. It's called a method of cooperative federalism, meaning the standards and programs are established by the feds, but they are then developed and implemented and enforced by the states. And that's exactly what we are talking about here. This is a Clean Water Act driven program, but it is being developed by people working for the state agency. And it's been that way for a long time. But eventually, EPA has the ability to call in states to see how they are doing with their state Clean Water Act programs. And if they are not performing sufficiently to address what EPA considers a priority, then the agency, the federal agency, can pursue withdrawal of approval of that state program over time. We do know clearly that these issues are a high priority to EPA. It's not, this commission's been briefed on actions by EPA to develop not only the MCLs that you heard about your last meeting, but also CERCLA rules and also RCRA rules that are also being proposed. So EPA is taking a broad approach to dealing with PFAS issues, and what DEQ is proposing for you today, we believe is perfectly in line with what EPA is saying.
Thank you. And I'll just take this one opportunity to say,
Yes.
this is, in all of my years serving on this commission, this is one of the most thorough RIAs I've seen, prepared as a draft to come before the committee. This, as a reminder, is a decision point to take to the EMC to go to public hearing, and we will have opportunities to improve it even more based on the public comments that we've received back. This is not a final decision by this commission. It's important to have the public input, the stakeholder input along the way. But I will just add, in addition to how thorough and professional this is done, we're seeing for the first time probably levels of cost analysis done by the contracted, respected national engineering firms that we haven't seen before. We are also seeing health effects studies and other benefits analyses that we have never been able to achieve in the past. This is all to the benefit of us and to the state because we have improved understanding, greater knowledge base to work with, more peer-reviewed journal and science to work on. And then just finally, just to address Commissioner Ellison's comment about the decades that this product has been produced. Yes, it has, but we have seen other products produced over decades too, in which we've all become vulnerable to the persistence of these compounds and the accumulation in the environment of them over the years. And now we are the ones who are suffering from that. So it's not as if these compounds that are introduced and disappeared. They're very persistent.
Thank you for your questions, Commissioner Deerhake, and some comments that you've made. Thank you. Commissioner Reardon, and then we'll follow up with Commissioner Yarborough.
Just obviously, this is important to every one of us sitting here and in this room. When we think about the other states that have to comply with the EPA Clean Water Act and how they can influence our streams and our rivers, and maybe this is Assistant Secretary Sizemore, can you tell us where are these other states that surround North Carolina in the context of where we are in this and ensuring that the waters that are coming into North Carolina meet the standards in which we're imposing here? Can we get someone to tell us a little bit of what's happening in the other states around us? Is that relevant here?
So part of our Fiscal analysis did look at the review of what other states are doing. If we were to look at the surrounding states, none of them either have proposed or adopted standards.
Say that again?
None of the surrounding states that would impact North Carolina directly, we have not seen them promulgate or even propose standards. The states that we're seeing are Wisconsin, Minnesota, New Jersey, Michigan, in terms of proposing and actually promulgating standards for surface water for PFAS.
Follow up, please.
Yes, sir.
Is that concerning considering the impact it's having on our citizens, the impact it's going to have on our industry, and that the surrounding states are not where we are? Is that concerning to?
Let me add, no, I do know for a fact that some of them are doing assessment monitoring like we are. They're doing assessment monitoring like
And
we are.
what states are they?
South Carolina, definitely. I know
Can you
that.
to our north a little bit, Virginia, West Virginia?
I just don't know. I know, but I know a lot of them had started doing assessment monitoring and in their pretreatment programs, asking the POTWs to do influent effluent sludge and look at their SIUs. These are memos that have come out from EPA encouraging states to do so. And on the meetings, we do hear that the other states are doing that. There are actually other staff that probably could give us a little better information. They're not all here today, but we could gather more information on that.
Just a couple more, Julie, let's stay with you. So I was quite interested in your tier one approach and your compliance strategy with PFOA, PFOS, and Gen X, and those three chemicals that's in your tier one approach. I noticed in the RFA that it says that PFOA and PFOS are the only two of the 8 PFAS chemicals classified as likely carcinogen. Is that correct? So 2 of those 8 are likely carcinogen.
That's correct.
But that has not been defined for the other 6 then, is that correct?
The others just aren't considered likely or carcinogens.
Okay.
They are not.
Did that weigh into your tier one approach?
We also say those are the most prevalent PFAS in the state.
Those 3?
Yes.
PFOA, PFOS.
Yes.
They're the 8 carbon compounds, right? They're the legacy compounds, those that EPA at one point, maybe so now, considered those of highest toxicity. Is that correct?
Yes.
Both of
The
them.
long chain.
The long chain compounds,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
It's in your tier one compliance
Yes.
strategy. And they added Gen X to that. And I understand Secretary Regan from here, he knows what we've gone through with Gen X. I can see some interest there. So just wanted to ask that. I won't hog all the time. I may have some other questions.
Great. Commissioner, yes. Did you, Tim, did you? No, Bill? Okay.
Yeah, could you put the water cycle back up that you had, surface water cycle that talks about just that little picture, right there it is. There's a piece here that's kind of missing. That's what it says, public owned treatment works and the discharger effluent. There's a piece there. What is it? Biosolids. Lime stabilized sludge, biosolids. You know where all those end up? Where have they been ending up for years? On agricultural land.
Well, many different places,
Well,
actually.
most of it's on agricultural land. I made a comment last meeting that if agriculture farmer is the same as a manufacturer, he's going to have a list of things he can use, efficacy for reasons, cost, whatever. Agriculture's been putting this out for a long time, been using it. Most of the time, it's not a lot of benefit to them. They do get some. A lot of it is from these deep sands or something. They get some organic material. As a soil scientist myself, I've worked with these a long time. So I see in this RIA is about agriculture. It's listed almost in a negative way in some respects. I'd like for you to, you don't have to answer this today, but in part of this RIA, I kind of think you need to have a way to say, what do agriculture producers that, when you find it, what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with those findings? I think that needs to be said.
So first of all, a lot of the POTW sludge goes to dedicated fields,
Correct.
okay, that are not producing crops for use.
A lot, but not all.
But a good portion of ours goes to dedicated fields. However, to answer your question is that we just did a huge biosolid study, Okay, and we are right in the middle of writing a report to tell you what we've learned. And from that, we hope to make some recommendations, because you're right, what do we do? That's a good question.
What do we tell the agricultural producer that he's, if it's found? The other piece of it that I'd like to say too is about the biosolids themselves. What does that person, is he going to quit accepting it? So then where would we go with it if you don't have that? You're talking about land applied, then you have some dedicated sites. Those are getting more and more limited all the time. So most of it is determined to be on private land, which is most of the time is agriculture. So the other thing I wanted to say is,
Actually, if you don't mind,
Yeah,
I'd
go
like
ahead.
to add to that, because I know we stress a lot, and it says up here, upstream impacts on surface water intakes
Yeah.
and reduction treatment burden. I do want to recognize that the reason why PFAS is in biosolids is because it's in all these influence in these processes, and then they're being discharged untreated to surface waters. Where biosolids comes into play is that if it doesn't come in at all or at lower concentrations, it will either not be in biosolids or will be in lower concentrations.
Don't disagree with that at all, but we've been doing this for for decades now.
Yes,
So
and
those
I-
materials are there. So that's my part. I'll give you an example. Back, show you how old I am. It's a long time ago. I was a young soil scientist. EPA asked to take some soil samples of apple orchards. They were looking for arsenic, they were looking for lead, some other materials. I went to a farmer friend and we took the samples, but the first thing he said was, you want to find it or you don't want to find it? If you go up this creek is where the older trees are, that's where we used the product. That's where you'll find it. If you go up this one, it's not. The point being is it's there. When EPA finally came out with some reports, it scared people. We couldn't sell an apple. So that's my point here is we've got to be real careful. Can you put number 56, page 56 up on that thing? The draft RIA. Do you have access to that?
If we go to OSBM, I can, unless you want to look at the original.
If there's a way to do that, it would be very helpful because I asked for what are you citing this when foods, let's see, how'd you write that? I try to read this as.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think we can look at the one that went to OSBM. We can only see the one that we've been working on for the past
That's
year.
correct. I think he's referring.
That's what we
to
got to
that
bring
one
up,
that's been-
right?
But
Stephanie, you're trying to get to OSBM, get us to the
No, I
one.
want the one that's, because that's the only one I've got.
No, that's fine. It's in your.
No, but there's a reference to a cleanwater.wisconsin.org.
I can't, sorry.
And when you put that up, it's all slides, but there's no peer review. There's no telling who it is. And there's some references in there that are totally incorrect. If you're using any of that data, I would have great suspect of it. I would encourage you to reevaluate that website that lists those slides. That's my only comment. I'm happy with where we are. I hope we can do something and make it work.
And you, page 56 of the 6
Yeah,
seven.
page 56. It's down at the bottom, close
Give
to.
him 1 second then to pull that up real
But
quick.
it says indirect exposure, food products, irrigation, wash water, crops grown in soil containing one of the compounds. All I'd like to know is at what level are you going to say it? Do we have studies saying that PFAS actually trans through for the roots, through the leaves, and can it be removed? How is it done? I didn't see any of that, but a reference to somebody up in Wisconsin that wrote a paper and put some slides in.
You will see 3 key studies that go beyond the Sunderland paper that points to exposure via various food aspects. And we looked at other studies that have shown, PFAS associations with select food items. We understand the relative fate and transport of longer chain and shorter chain. Shorter chains are going to move further up in that crop if they're grown in the ground, versus longer chain are going to probably stay at the roots. So there is a foundational science base that does support this. And I do want to note that everything that was added here, there are peer-reviewed studies or scientific defensible support of these aspects.
Disagree.
So Mike,
Come back to you. I'll
wait a
disagree.
second.
I'll come back to you.
Wait a second. So my understanding, Commissioner Yarborough, is that you want a more definitive I guess, dialogue or breakdown in the regulatory impact analysis on agriculture.
Yeah, and I
And you're
think.
wanting more reference points as we move back into the regulatory impact analysis.
And not put it out that it's an agricultural problem, that if you're going to have some kind of a food product, you're automatically going to be exposed to some kind of a health benefit, which is inexcusable because you can scare the public out of buying anything, and that area could actually be devastated from trying to grow something for a while. How long, I can't tell you. I can tell you it's happened in the past. That's all.
Okay, I
Mr.
just wanted to understand that your concern or question was, can this be included in the regulatory impact analysis is in reference to agriculture?
Yeah,
There is
rather than that
reference.
reference that they had from Wisconsin about some
Some
water
additions.
keeper.
All right. Yes, sir. Commissioner Reardon?
Yeah,
Follow-up?
I would just like to add with Commissioner Yarborough, we talk about biosolids. Well, let's talk about the source of those biosolids, municipal wastewater treatment plants. But, sometimes we leave that part of the equation out.
That's the part I'm talking about.
That's the
man.
part you're talking about. A lot of times we refer to biosolids. We know what we mean, but does everyone know that the wastewater treatment plant, the municipal wastewater treatment plants in their community, they clean out their skimmers, they end up with biosolids that's being applied and has for decades indiscriminately? Is that the point you're making?
Absolutely, and that's where most of this product gets put out on agricultural lands from the waste treatment plants, and that's, if PFAS is located in everything, we probably all have it been able, it going to the treatment plant.
And that's
You're laughing
exactly,
about it.
right, and that's exactly why we want to measure it and really see what, if it is a problem, to what extent. And that's part, again, let's do an assessment monitoring for surface water, and we're doing biosolids monitoring to try and see what that problem is, to define it.
Commissioner Baumgartner?
I'm glad you got that up, Stephanie. So I'm going to run through a series of questions really quick.
Commissioner Baumgartner?
Yeah.
Yes.
Would you like me to note them down and then we can go back to them?
Page 22, table 4. And we may skip around a lot, Stephanie. I apologize.
It's fine. Just, bear with me in the back. Okay.
Table 4. So getting to Commissioner Reardon's point a while ago, PFAS, PFOA, it says in the cell, go down. There you go. My eyes are better now. PFAS, PFOA are the only two compounds labeled as carcinogens, not likely carcinogens. I went down a rabbit hole because that kind of caught my eye. I went down the rabbit hole of Appendix A. That references the final human health toxicity assessment for PFAS. And it says on page 5-12, second paragraph, several new studies have been published that warrant further evaluation to determine whether likely designation is appropriate for PFAS, and requested that the agency provide explicit description of widely available PFAS does not meet the EPA's guideline for carcinogenic assessment. And if you go to page 514, it says carcinogenicity for PFAS does not warrant description exceeding likely carcinogenic to humans. Accuracy matters. I'm not disputing that at all. Just that those references either need a new reference that says it's a carcinogen or change the likely carcinogen. Is what I'm suggesting. And I'm not disputing that now. I'm just making a point. Page 6, bullet 2, talks about ingestion. Bullet number 2, the last part talks about scientists have identified ingestion through food intake and drinking water as primary pathways for PFAS exposure to humans. Page 49, the last paragraph, references that in drinking water, which is 20% of an individual's exposure. Page 7, bullet number 3, I'll get to that one in a second. So can you clarify, understandably, this is a water standard, but can you clarify and give some references to where this data is coming from?
In terms of the relative exposure?
Yeah, exposure and the ingestion and how's that data being derived? And
Yeah,
just
that,
in the
that,
IRA?
yeah, that main study is a Sunderland paper that I can definitely pass along that looked at relative exposure to adults, and not only adults, but also children, and their relative exposure through not only studies in the US, but in also other countries.
Just some summary in the
Sure.
IRA that would relate to that. Page 7, bullet number 3, and I think it's another reference as well, and this is just a curiosity of mine, that over 10,000 private well owners were offered bottled water. Considering that plastics have PFAS, does bottled water ever get tested? And what's the level of PFAS that may be in those? Has that ever been evaluated? Just curious.
There are no regulations on bottled water.
I got that.
Okay.
I understand, but are we trading a witch for the devil? Are people being exposed to PFAS because of their water, their drinking water, but now we're giving them bottled water, which may have levels of PFAS as well? I'm just asking the question. It's something that.
Well, before we offer it, usually this happened with Duke because they had chromium, right? So we offered bottled water. So you got to test it first before you give them that bottled water.
I guess my
Yeah.
question is, has it been tested? And when this bottled water is given, has been tested?
And division, I have to admit, I'm not privy to that knowledge. I know Division of Waste Management worked on this, so.
Okay, all right. Just curious. That was something. There's extensive discussion about private wells and a surface water standard, and discussion about groundwater to the point that even on table 61, page 61, I don't see reference to the cost summary for POTWs outside of groundwater. Is that true? Or maybe I'm misunderstanding the information.
So first, page, what'd you say,
61, table 20. And maybe there needs to be some further explanation of that.
Are you referring to the avoided treatment or the private well?
POTW monitoring and
Oh.
POTWs are mentioned, but it says private well avoided treatment.
Yeah.
Is that the only calculation used here? I mean, what about the treatment of that POTWs would have to utilize? And
Are you referring to Deputy Director Gribbs's comment about source water? Is there?
to the IRA, I'm looking at this and I'm seeing that you've calculated the impacts, the average annual cost of these impacts.
Okay.
But it looks like to me you've used groundwater instead of surface water to calculate that. And if I'm wrong, that's fine. There needs to be some explanation about that.
So that,
So.
yeah, so that column in terms of the private well and avoided treatment is the benefit of implementing a surface water standard. On the total cost, it's the ones that are directly impacted. NIPDES does not regulate or control any public water supply or private wells.
What about the surface water POTWs that have to comply? Is that calculated in here?
Yes. Yes. Every POTW that we deemed would need an effluent limit, and that analysis is in our RIA pretty extensively, is someone who's going to be discharging with a discharge permit to a surface water.
When I read this table, so you're saying the 7 million number, the SIUs, the 7 million number of local governments, that includes surface water and private well?
This is the POTW that has to comply with the NIPDES permit that discharges to surface water.
I'm yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little bit confusing. If there's some way to clarify that.
Because of the second column that mentions private wells and
Yes,
groundwater.
Yeah, because when I'm looking at that, I'm thinking, well, for that POTW, all you've used is groundwater. Which we've got a meeting coming up soon to talk about groundwater standards.
Yeah.
Mr.
I'm
Chair,
respecting your time.
one point of order.
A point of order. I'm respecting each committee. I know the time. I know it's 3:15. We've got 2 more items to go, but I'm respecting the questions in reference to really the RIA. I think that's where we're leaning to, and I would like to respectfully ask that committee members make their questions And so we can get it where the department understands these questions and moves forward in that direction. So if we could just in the,
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. From the chairman.
From the
Ex
chair.
officio member of your committee.
Yes, sir.
There's 2 items that's left.
Yes,
One of those items has to be conducted
It
today.
will today.
One does not. So
that is
just
correct.
making you aware, we probably need to
I'm-
save 15 minutes for that last
I'm
item.
fully aware of that, and
Thank
that
you.
is the next item after
Thank you.
this item. And I just spoke to council about that, trying to,
Okay.
get to the means of the end.
We had the
Okay.
same
Thank you
conversation.
so much.
Chair Keen,
Please,
I can
Commissioner
stop
Baumgartner.
and provide these in writing if you want. It's however you want to do it.
Commissioner Reardon had a follow-up. Questions?
I think I'll understand, appreciate the amount of time, but I'll read the question. You can figure and answer it later, I guess. But on page 54 of the RIA, you talk about nearly 85,000 households will projected to need filtration. This can be an RO, reverse osmosis, or it can be a carbon bank. The question I have for the department, many of those regenerate, meaning they backwash. What's happening with the wastewater out of those filters on that property? Is it going in streams? Is it bioaccumulating on the property? But if we're going to have these filter banks installed at 85,000 residential places to accumulate the PFAS, and that's a good thing if their water needs treating, we're glad there's methodology. But have we thought through what's going to happen in those concentrated discharges out of those filtration units? And if so, maybe someone can speak to it or provide it in writing. That's fine. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Commissioner Reardon. And Commissioner Derrick.
Thank you. I certainly want to respect the time. I understand that. I think everybody has asked, every member has asked a question except Mr. Tweedy. But Mr. Tweedy, did you have anything else to say? Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion to proceed to the EMC with a request for public notice and hearings for the proposed rule amendments to surface water standards 02B to 11 to 12 to 14 to 15, 16, 18, and 20, and the permitting rule of 404, and the fiscal and regulatory impact analysis.
Second.
Wait, I haven't asked for a second yet. Wait just-
Well-
Just a second. I wanted to make sure that everyone understand her motion, but respectfully, thank you.
And that
Then
is
you make
that
the
is my
motion.
motion.
Is that the motion that was presented to us today by the department?
It's verbatim.
Thank you. That's-
And I make
wanted
that
to know.
motion because
Okay, thank you.
the changes that we have today that some people voice concern about is a minor technical change. The numbers are still in the document.
Sure. We can do
I
that
think we
through
all
discussion. Yes,
understand
ma'am.
that.
We got it. We
And,
got the motion on the floor.
Thank you, sir.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
think we're ready to.
Is
to move on.
there a second?
I already seconded.
Okay, Commissioner Twitty, thank you for second. Now we open it, and I'll allow that motion. Even though this is an information item today and there's been much discussion, we will certainly allow that motion and the second by Commissioner Twitty. Now, questions?
I want to go to council with that.
I'm
It's
going
been
to ask for
advertised,
questions
it's been
first.
advertised as an information item.
We-
The public expects this to be information, not action. So
Right.
there's a string of things that have to happen to do that.
Understand. So what we're going to do is I ask council to go ahead and read that, what we discussed, but I wanted to make sure respectfully to ask the committee members, do they have any questions? Commissioner Twitty.
Quick comment. It was pointed, I haven't raised a question. I haven't raised a question because I've been listening intently. And the things that I'm hearing, there's a lot of questions, but they're all clarifications. This is to move to the next step in this process on I think what everybody acknowledges is a very important process. It's not solving everything. It's still going to be in draft. The RIA is still going to be in draft. We learned last week that's in draft until the rule is approved. All these changes are going to have time to be made and addressed. But I'm not hearing anything that substantively changes this issue and why we should move forward. That's.
Thank you.
If I may.
Mr. Allison.
I have a lot more questions, and I apologize for what monopolization I did of the question period. It was not intentional. I didn't even get to some. There are some differences of opinion in the peer-reviewed science, some of which are orders of magnitude different in terms of the safe levels. So the department has mentioned other countries. international experts, and in the RIA, they cite the Nordic Institute or something like that. We've got good scientists here, and other countries, civilized Western countries like Canada and Australia, they have vastly different limits on some of these compounds. And so I'm far away from being comfortable with such a rule of such importance until we can get, as a committee and as a commission, we can get a better handle on things.
Chair Keen, have 20 seconds.
Please. Commissioner Twitty.
Just wanted to point, I've played with these equations a little bit because that's what I do for a job. So I've put them in, and I would encourage you to play with these numbers. You know, there's been talk about reducing the cancer risk. There's been talk about changing body weight, fish consumption. We're talking, from my math, and I might be wrong, we're changing 0.06 nanograms to 0.1 nanograms or 0.2 nanograms. I think the changes we're talking about are still going to set standards that are with below the thresholds of which these things can be analyzed. So again, I feel like we're arguing over things that can be adjusted later. We have a triennial process. We can set the rule now. We can change it in 3 years when there's better science, and there's maybe science that refutes that. So I think there's all a process for handling this. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I have a question, and this is going to be asked during the discussion process. I asked the council, is that what happens when the department has not provided proper public notice on the revised RIA, even though it might be minute, it still has been revised in some way in reference to what was launched to the public and through the website on the 27th of June. So this revised RIA to be in compliance with open meeting law. So I just need an answer to that, please.
The requirement is that you provide public notice within 48 hours prior to a meeting of the purpose of the meeting. That usually goes with all the documents supporting it. Whether this revised RIA is sufficient notice, I believe would be a question for the body, although I honestly cannot tell you certainly for certain right now.
Okay, my question then from that comment from council, I'm going to ask just for clarity, has the department released this for public notice from the revised approved OSBM this morning? Has it been released yet?
Sir, as best as I know, OSBM certified it this morning, and they put it on their website as part of all RIAs that they approve for all state agencies. So that's all I know because I've been here all day.
Right, thank you. But your department hasn't released it. I saw it on the website this morning, yes.
It is on the website.
Okay, so with that, any other discussions? I would like to listen to council, just 1 second. Yes, ma'am.
There needs to be a determination of whether it's a substantive change or a simple technical change. There must be 48 hours notice, public notice.
Will you recognize this?
Mr.
Ex officio chairman,
Mr. Chairman.
the pages have changed. We have reviewed something for over a week, over our July 4th holidays on our free time with page numbers, and now we know the number of pages has changed. We don't know what's in the document and what's not. We're being asked to vote on something we have not studied again, and we have not been provided red lines of that in writing. We've heard presentations, but our duty is to look at that and make sure nothing is substantially changed, and we have not had an opportunity to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And since, Mr. Chairman, wait a second, I got one question from a committee member, Ellison.
A question for council that I don't think I heard an answer to, that the publicly advertised agenda for this meeting stated that this would be an information item to continue the process of working out this rule. So making it an action item, is that without 48 hours notice to the public? Is that acceptable?
I don't know that I have to answer for that, Commissioner Ellison. I don't know.
So we have two issues that could conceivably be non-compliant with public meetings laws. Or maybe they both are, but we don't know. Is that correct?
I believe because it is listed as an information item, strict compliance with your open meetings law would say that you should not be making it an action item today.
Thank you.
So with that, in reference to that from legal counsel from the Attorney General's office, then we will proceed to, I'm going to allow the motion and allow the second. But with this in discussion, then I'm going to go ahead and call for question and ask us to vote on this motion. Wait a second, Commissioner Ellison.
Point of order, is there not a mechanism in Robert's rules to table the motion?
Chairman can do that.
Chairman can do that.
It can be tabled until the next meeting. There's several questions that have been asked that are in question from the committee to look at the RIA. And I can do a substitution motion, or we can take other motions, but we can call for question.
Per Roberts, you can make a motion to postpone indefinitely, and that would give priority to vote on postponing indefinitely before you do the main motion.
That's right. And it takes precedence.
And I believe that's right, counsel. Even in committee, we can do that, I believe.
It is.
No, I can't make that motion because I'm an ex
I
officio.
can. I move that we postpone the motion.
Will not postpone indefinitely.
Okay.
We're gonna
I
put it on
move
the
that we
table.
postpone the motion, or that we table the motion
Yeah.
until we see the documents, the revised documents, and have an opportunity to go through them and understand them better.
Motions on, okay, so that would be a substitute. Which motion would that fall under Robert's rules?
Substitute.
Substitute motion.
Could we do a substitute motion? And you've made that motion, and I'll need a second on that motion.
May I ask for a clarification before the second or not?
Not since that motion is on the floor. We'll take care of that motion. It's a substitute motion, and we'll need a second on that.
Second.
The motion on the floor then, and been seconded by Commissioner Baumgartner. It's a substitute motion that we table this motion until we can, you want to be more specific, until we can do what exactly? Because I would like to make sure that we understand what we are doing on the motion, in your motion.
Until the next scheduled committee meeting.
That would be in September.
That would give us time to receive the
Okay,
documents and review them.
right. And okay, all right, and it's been seconded. Now, discussion on the substitute motion.
I can ask our counsel, but I think the more appropriate word is defer rather than table. That's typically been the practice, the words that we've used here for that purpose. Table has a more indefinite meaning to it. Defer means to, and if you specify the next month. But where I'm going with this is that, and I appreciate the chair allowing the motion, the original motion. I will say that we have heard this in March. We talked about it in April. It was removed from the agenda in May. And we have had multiple information items over the year and a half or two on this. We are 2 weeks into reviewing a document that is substantively unchanged. We have a minor revision. The staff has told us it was minor. I understand that the procedure and the rules are saying, in our council's opinion, that this needed proper notice. I think we are ready. I think we have had enough discussion about this. We are at a stage that we're early enough. I'm just curious how many more meetings members are going to continue to ask for detailed questions and revisions before we'll actually act. At our at our May meeting, when the item was taken off the agenda, I specifically asked verbatim, Mr. Chairman, will the committee act on this item in July? And the answer was yes. And here we are one more time with an information item. It's got to be really frustrating to the citizens and residents of this state who have suffered for years with the consequences of having this accumulated persistent toxin in their drinking water and all of the inconveniences and health concerns and anxiety that this has posed. That's why I went ahead and introduced it today.
Thank you, Commissioner Deerhake. Any other discussion on the substantive motion by Commissioner Allison by committee members?
Mr. Chairman,
By committee members.
Mr. Chairman, as
By
sort of
committee members.
volunteer.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm not discussing the motion. I was going to make the parliamentary point, which is
I'm not going to allow any right now.
the motion to substitute has to be voted on before you actually vote on the substitute motion.
We're going to do that. Yeah, we're going to do that. So any other comments or questions? Okay.
Continue to vote to proceed on the substitute.
Yes.
On the change.
Okay. Is there a motion on the floor that we move to vote on the substantive motion?
The motion to substitute is currently before.
The main motion.
Wait. Motion on the floor is the substitute motion.
That's right.
You need to vote to substitute the motion that Commissioner Deerhake made.
And then we need to vote on that.
And then you need to vote on the substance of the
So-
substitute motion.
Because we're going to vote on the substantive motion first to allow that substantive motion to be part of the main motion. Is that correct?
You're voting to allow the substitute motion to proceed for the main motion.
Okay.
So to be clear, the motion on the floor is, and I'll try to get the parlance right, is the substitute motion to defer action on the department's recommendation until our next meeting.
That's
Is
correct.
that the correct parlance? Defer, is that?
Defer is correct.
Okay.
We'll use that. And there was a second by Commissioner Baumgartner. And there was discussion. All those in favor of the substantive motion, raise their hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. All those opposed? 2, 4 to 2. Do I have to vote? Do I have?
Put the Commissioner Ellis.
Do I have to vote on that? I didn't think so. Okay, I just wanted to ask, sure.
Now you put
Now
Commissioner
we're going to put the motion on the floor of the substitute that Commissioner Ellison made. That we defer this action until our next meeting, which is in September.
No.
We voted to allow it. Now we're going to vote on it. To defer it. And I think, and it was made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Yeah, we're going to vote on this, to defer to the next meeting in September. All those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed? 2, 4 to 2. Now, we don't have to vote. Or we're going to vote on the main
The
motion.
original motion is now deferred to the next meeting.
Right. Do you want to vote on that?
No, you just, that was.
That was it, but I just want to make sure. Okay. All right. We just need to get a copy of that, and thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Can we ensure that the guidance that you received from the Attorney General here is also in the minutes?
Yes,
please.
Absolutely.
Make sure.
It's being videoed as well. Everything is. Before we get to the next item, that's going to close out this item. Before we get to the next one, we're going to take a 5-minute break and then we'll be right back. 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
What's that?
You good?
Hell no, I ain't good. What a clusterfuck.
On the docket today, and we're going to take the last information item, number 5, and we're going to move it to number 4. So that's where we'll be right now, getting started, and then we'll take 4 and put it at the end. Sorry, Karen, for that, but we have to work on this 1.4 today, this 1.4 docks and in the Cape Fear River Basin. And Jenny Granson and Michael Teblo, Division of Water Resources, will make the presentation. Good afternoon, Jenny.
Hi, are you guys ready for me to begin?
You're on go. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right, good afternoon. My name is Jenny Graysnack. I'm the Assistant Regional Supervisor in the Winston-Salem Regional Office, Division of Water Resources. I am presenting today with Michael Montebello. He is the Chief of the Division's MPDES Program Branch. He and I will be providing the most recent semi-annual progress report on 1,4-dioxane in the Cape Fear River Basin. And I'll just begin with background on why we are required to present this information to you. It began with the City of Greensboro special order by consent for 1,4-dioxane. The original SOC was approved by the EMC in March 2021 and became effective in May of that year. This original SOC was for 2 years and had compliance values of 1,4-dioxane of 45 micrograms per liter in year 1, and year 2, 33 micrograms per liter. The Fayetteville Public Works Commission and the Haw River Assembly filed legal petition against that SOC in April 2021. And due to those settlement negotiations, an amended SOC was approved by the EMC in November of that same year and became effective in December. The outcome was a 3-year SOC rather than 2 years with lower compliance values for 1,4-dioxane of 35 micrograms per liter, 31.5 micrograms per liter, and then finally in year 3, 23 micrograms per liter. The settlement stipulated that the EMC must direct DEQ to supplement its 1,4-dioxane study to include these semi-annual progress reports to the Water Quality Committee on DEQ's 1,4-dioxane actions in the Cape Fear River Basin. The settlement agreement is included as an attachment to this presentation if you want to refer to it. And this is how the settlement agreement breaks down what DEQ must do. It directs DEQ to study point source dischargers in the Cape Fear River Basin and requires these semi-annual progress reports, as well as a written progress report submitted at least annually for 3 years to the Water Quality Committee. And these reports were required to include at a minimum first, ongoing and planned surface water and discharge sampling efforts, including the results of such efforts, identification of point source dischargers of 1,4-dioxane in the Cape Fear River Basin upstream of drinking water intakes, an update on the actions DEQ is taking to reduce 1,4-dioxane concentrations in the Cape Fear River Basin from any identified sources, including incorporation of 1,4-dioxane into our MPDES permits. And then finally, an explanation of DEQ's reasoning regarding all of these points and the expected time of our completion. So that sums up why I'm here, and I will give you an update on the special order by consent for Greensboro. Most importantly, the final year of the SOC, which was year 3, ended on April 30th. And the entire SOC will expire July 15th of this year. Greensboro submitted its required year 3 report on May 31 of this year, and that's also included as an attachment to this presentation that you should have. In that report, the city stated that during the SOC year 3, They collected over 602 1,4-dioxane samples and spent over $77,000 in commercial lab testing for 1,4-dioxane. All of that data and all of the required reports that were submitted for the SOC are located on the Greensboro website, which is linked here. It's also important to note that Greensboro has not exceeded its SOC compliance value since year one of the SOC. So DEQ's conclusion is that the SOC was effective and it helped the city to identify significant industrial users as sources of 1,4-dioxane and take pretreatment actions to reduce those concentrations. As you can see from this graph of discharge data from Greensboro, the effluent concentrations of 1,4-dioxane have significantly decreased since the start of the SOC in 2021. The city did exceed the SOC compliance value in year one 3 times, which we did report to the Water Quality Committee on those issues. They were working towards determining where those high concentrations were by monitoring within their collection system. And also to note, these are daily grab samples that the city reports on their monthly discharge monitoring reports that they submit to DEQ. But most notably, they have been consistently less than 10 micrograms per liter since 2021. Also from that year 3 report, these are Greensboro's monthly effluent averages for year 3 of the SOC, the final year. The average, just interestingly, of these 12 monthly concentrations equals 3.55. Which is of note since our proposed 1,4-dioxane permit limits for Greensboro would be a monthly average of 5 micrograms per liter and a daily max of 10 micrograms per liter. And as you can see, the monthly average in April 2024 did go over 5, and they were close to 5 for a few months in the fall and winter. Greensboro provided details of all of those instances in their year 3 report, which you can look for more detail in the report, and I'll also discuss some in the next slide. This is just additional information from Greensboro that was included in the year 3 report. Greensboro investigated any instances of even slightly elevated 1,4-dioxane effluent values and tracked those significant industrial users and their effluent data to determine a source each time. Each of these slightly elevated effluent values in December and in January and then in April was tracked back to some industrial discharger. And the city was able to issue a notice of exceedance in each of those cases to the industry of concern. Since the SOC year 3 ended on April 30th, Greensboro is now conducting post-SOC voluntary actions that are actually very similar to the SOC year 3 requirements, almost identical, and they have been doing so since May 1, 2024. Greensboro is continuing its weekly effluent grab sample monitoring and will report within 24 hours to DEQ and downstream utilities if the result is greater than 23 micrograms per liter, and 23 is the value equal to the SOC year 3 compliance value. That's the significance of that number. The city has stated that they will maintain all of their current pretreatment program mechanisms for 1,4-dioxane that were developed throughout this SOC, and they'll modify any of the industrial permits as necessary and require those significant industrial users of concern to continue to collect and retain daily samples. The city will also continue its sampling and monitoring program for 1,4-dioxane, and that includes a weekly sample at the Pittsburgh drinking water intake, which is obviously downstream of the city of Greensboro. Also twice per month sampling in Jordan Lake on the Haw River Arm. Their influent composite sample, which is taken weekly. And they will also continue their surveillance monitoring that they do throughout their collection system with some samplers, composite samplers and such. And also they will continue to retain their weekly composite of their daily effluent samples. And that is the end of me, and I will send it over to Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I will like to update on our actions to both reduce 1,4-dioxane concentration and to incorporate 1,4-dioxane requirements into NPDES permits. This is a summary of the various permits broken down by municipal, POTW, industrial, and groundwater remediation. At the present time, we have only one permit issued with limits, and that permit is in litigation for Asheboro. The rest of these are permit monitoring requirements, varied with the varied frequencies of the monitoring for 1,4-dioxane. So just as a reminder, the city of Asheboro, the NPDES permit was issued in August 2023. The permit still is in litigation. The permit was appealed, and the new limits are not currently in effect. And for those particular permits that were in that permit that was issued and appealed, it had a phased 5-year schedule with limits that went from 55.7 micrograms to the final limit of 21.6 micrograms after 5 years. So what other anticipated actions are we looking at? For POTWs, we're looking at permits for Greensboro, High Point, including their proposed expansion, Reedsville, and Burlington. And these are under review by staff currently as far as the requirements for that. We also have one industrial facility, Alpac Polyester, formerly DEQ America. Their Cedar Creek site, we are reassessing the limits due to downstream drinking water intakes, and there is a potential 1,4-dioxane effluent limit with a compliance schedule that's under review. And just as a note, that particular facility's current permitted flow is 500,000 gallons a day. So what about additional point sources? So we use reasonable potential analysis to look at other permits where we might include monitoring or potentially limits for 1,4-dioxane. We're prioritizing permits based on the sampling data that we have and the relationship of the discharge to downstream drinking water intakes. We are trying to address any challenges that we might have when limits might approach treatment technology. For example, the High Point situation with their expansion. We're also working with significant industrial users to look at alternatives like product substitution or relocation of manufacturing products. And I will reiterate what Jenny said. I would say the Greensboro is an example of a success story where the SOC ended up significantly reducing the 1,4-dioxane levels. So from the Greensboro SOC settlement agreement, 3 years from the date we had revised the SOC, we're supposed to provide a report which talks about what recommendations we have to achieve compliance and any modifications. That final report is due in November to the EMC, Water Quality Committee. And then Jenny, if you want to come up for any questions that you might have, that's basically the summary of the report.
Thank you, Michael. I have one question. Will this be a tool that we can move forward in incorporating it with the 200 rules or 208 in reference to the RIA, in reference to surface and groundwater? Will this event that's happening in Greensboro and these others, can we use it as a tool in moving forward as 1.4 become, I understand we're trying to regulate 1.4 is what I'm getting from the commission. So will this be used as a tool to be a part of that process?
I'm not sure that I can answer that.
Sushma Maesmore, I think I understand your question. The 1,4-dioxane, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. The 1.4 is not regulated, correct, on the federal end?
There are no water quality standards at the federal level. Yes.
Okay. So when we're working through this whole process of the Greensboro and through litigation, are we finding substance that we can use forward as we work on the 208 rule?
Absolutely. This experience and the data has provided significant background material, but also strategies for optimum reduction through upstream source reductions. And this SOC and the experiences have told us that through monitoring at these trunk lines and source reduction at those SIUs is a primary means of achieving compliance with these limits.
Got it. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you.
And we do want to appreciate Greensboro's work to find the sources and identify them, so.
Yes, sir. Commissioner Ellison, thank you.
Do you have cost data on what Greensboro spent tracking them down and then on whatever methodologies were used by the SIUs to reduce their effluent?
Well, there is someone from City of Greensboro here who could answer that question better. That might be in their year 3 report. I'm not sure how much, do you have a sum of how much money you spent? This is the Water Resources Director for City of Greensboro.
Water Reclamation Manager.
Oh, Water Reclamation Manager, excuse me.
I mean, it's been about over 100,000 a year. We use
Please come to the podium, and if you're going to speak, thank you.
Thank you for jumping in.
Tell us who you are.
Yes, my name is Elijah Williams, Water Reclamation Manager for the City of Greensboro. The process we used was sampling. We sampled using composite samples, not the grab samples, so we could get more of a time frame. And we were able to go out to the different sewer sheds, and that's what helped us, along with doing the sampling of each and every SIU. So between those two methods, we were able to see a baseline of what was there, and you can see that in the report. The other thing that we were able to do is we have surveillance sampling out all of the time in major areas where we have industry. So if we have a high exceedance, we can send that sample in and see if that number is high, and then have the industries in that area send their samples in that they hold. And then that's how we was able to find the second industry. The first industry was able to find before the SOC. We spend a little over 100,000 in sampling a year. I would think specifically to the SOC and the testing, it was 77, but we rush our samples to try to make sure we get no more than 48-hour turnaround because we know it's important for the downstream utilities to know as soon as possible if we had some type of exceedance.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for coming from Greensboro and making the trip today. Any other questions? Thank you for the information and that presentation. The last item, information item, will be an update on the study narrative standards for state law 2023-1378. Karen Higgins, Division of Water Resources. Good afternoon, Karen. Great.
All right, good afternoon again. Karen Higgins, just presenting a brief update on the study. As a reminder, the session law directed the EMC to complete the study. Last time we got some comments asking about when the narrative criteria is used, so we added, I think it's one sentence, just kind of clarifying that a narrative criteria is used when there's not an adopted numeric criteria. There were also a number of questions about MPDS permitting and how this is used. And so a footnote was added just to clarify that effluent limits are required under a different part of the federal regulations, and regardless of whether the state has adopted a translator, they still have to protect for narrative criteria with permits. We also got a number of questions from the commission about how the EPA would respond or feel about different items. So we reached out to our EPA Region 4 and asked for their assistance in responding to some of the questions that you all have asked. And that was provided in attachment B to this agenda item. And I think that's the fastest I've gotten through this. Any questions?
Karen, we appreciate that, and we understand that it is a directive, and we will work through that. I am thinking of getting together with the department as chair and putting some members on maybe a quick little committee of maybe 3 to work with you, and let's nail this down. And get to something in September.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Are there any questions or comments for Karen? We have, that was our last information item, and we are running about 45 minutes over. But I would like to ask real quickly, are there any comments from committee members before we adjourn? I have a closing comment that I want to. Yes. Director's comment. I'm sorry, Director Rogers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We hadn't forgot me. I hadn't forgot me.
I appreciate the committee's work today. We certainly appreciate the questions that have been provided regarding the RIA. We look forward to getting those questions in writing and look forward to responding to those questions for the next meeting and hopefully moving this O2B rule forward. So we certainly appreciate that. I also want to thank the staff for the work that they've done on this. And we certainly do appreciate that. And those are my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director Rogers. Real quick, just some notes, but today in my position as your chair and this committee and how responsible we have been is that my thoughts are once that you set a surface water standard, it's extremely difficult to get the EPA to allow you to adopt something less strict. As such, if you rush to judgment on a surface water quality standard, you run a risk that you're stuck with it forever and that you force dischargers to install treatment technology to meet a standard that was ultimately more stringent than necessary. So instead of setting some standard in stone that we're stuck with forever, and may or may not really work anyway, we don't know yet. This committee, with the help of the department, are doing our best to reduce discharges with other tools that are at our disposal while we go through the process and understanding where the contaminant is coming from and the ability of all sources to reduce their contribution to that contaminant. Fortunately, with the RIA, other supporting documents, and stakeholder involvement, we're in a position to define and allocate mass of the contaminant among the different sources. While this effort is going on and on a parallel path, we can be deciding what the drinking water standard for the contaminant should be, as well as how much of the burden of complying and enforcing that standard will be on the discharger side versus the drinking water utility side. Now, I'll leave you with this. I would encourage you that this committee stay on course, focusing solely on getting this right for the citizens of North Carolina. I thank you so much for coming today. We'll turn this over to the next meeting, which will be groundwater, and I would think in 10 minutes. Thank you again for coming. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.